Hello. Yesterday, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump held a press conference. I made a video about it. In that video, I suggested that Keir Starmer would be desperate for the Donald Trump visit to deflect attention away from the shambolic leadership that we have been experiencing here in the UK. It hasn't and it won't. Keir's very naive in some ways, worryingly so. And I think he's also naive if he thinks that the Donald Trump visit would mean that the Peter Mandelson affair would go away. There are big questions to be asked. These questions really get to the core of Keir as a leader. Is he fit for purpose? In all honesty, is he fit for purpose? Spoiler alert, I don't think so. Not at all. And I think it's important that we look back to Mandelson because, of course, events happen, public attention drifts away. But that appointment and what was going on behind the scenes are incredibly worrying and also, in my opinion, point to not only poor leadership, but a lack of leadership. So what I thought we'd do is to visit or revisit the emergency meeting that took place. Yes, emergency meeting. So here we have Kemi Badenoch. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this important emergency debate, and I congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Goole and Pocklington, David Davis. We'll hear from him shortly, along with Kemi Badenoch, and, well, also a very interesting Labour member who was speaking at this debate. So it was an emergency debate, and in my opinion, it did not receive as much publicity as it should have done, partly because Donald Trump's been visiting. This, by the way, took place on the 16th of September. So here's the Labour Party member, Emily Thornberry. Remember, she's Labour.
So the question is this: does having significant information in the public domain about your relationship with an internationally prolific child sex offender not raise more red flags than simply being born in Belfast? Is a civil servant a greater risk to this country because they are married to somebody who was born in the Middle East, or because they were close friends with Jeffrey Epstein? Did the Foreign Office vetting process miss a glaring national security and reputational risk, or was it told to overlook it? Mr. Speaker, my committee's duty is to scrutinise the Foreign Office to make it the best that it can be. Neither the Foreign Office nor the Cabinet Office has shown itself to be the best it can be in the process surrounding this appointment. I'll get to the end of this paragraph, and then, of course, I will give way. That is why my committee asked yesterday for the Foreign Office Permanent Undersecretary and the Cabinet Office Head of Propriety and Ethics to appear before us and to explain what went wrong. We have been told that no one is available before the recess, and we will continue to push for prompt and public answers.
And this is really worrying and really important. And in case it wasn't clear from the video, what she's talking about is the vetting process that people like, Emily herself and David Davis and Keir and Peter Mandelson and so on, and civil servants go through. And one of the flags, it would seem, it's news to me, is connection to Belfast, which is interesting. And also if they have a partner who is in the Middle East. And again, those are my words, I'm paraphrasing. The point she's making is that if those are flagged up, not necessarily, of course, there's any problem there at all, but they're flagged up. But it is a vetting process. There'll be other flags also. But was Peter Mandelson and his relationships with not just Epstein, but other people around the world? I mean, Mandelson is highly networked. That's one of the reasons that they picked him. It clouded the judgment hugely, in my opinion. But it's like, okay, so these are flagged up. Are you actually trying to tell me that you didn't have concerns about this guy? And Emily's also asking there, were you told just to shut up about it? were you overruled? Because the people in positions of influence, whether that was Keir Starmer, and or his advisor or advisors, thought that it was much more important to get the prize, so to speak, of Mandelson in the White House. Interesting, right? So let's go on.
It is extraordinary that on the eve of the President's state visit, we are talking about the US ambassador who's been sacked in scandal. And there are as many questions that we all have as are unanswered questions. There are many questions I will also ask today, Mr. Speaker, but the Prime Minister needs to do three things. The Prime Minister needs to come clean about what he knew and when he knew it. Yes. Not send his junior ministers to cover for him. The Prime Minister needs to publish the Mandelson-Epstein files in full. The Prime Minister needs to take responsibility for the appointment of Lord Mandelson as ambassador to Washington. But the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, is not here because he is hiding from Parliament, hiding from questions. And I know that he is a busy man, but confidence in him and in his government rests on him being able to account for what happened. And so far, no one is taking any responsibility. We have our ambassador in the US sacked over his relationship with a man convicted of child sex offences. What's more, and this tells you everything you need to know, this was an appointment apparently forced through by the Prime Minister and or his Chief of Staff. We see a political ally pushed ahead of qualified candidates because the Prime Minister and Morgan McSweeney admired his talent for mixing with the rich and powerful, despite his known links.
So, despite his known links with, someone who was convicted, Epstein, and there's a lot of stuff in there that Kemi Badenoch covered, but what I think I want to sort of highlight here is that it's this sense again of the security services are not stupid. You look at the guy, you look at the connections, you look at the capacity for, blackmail, amongst other things, that he would have been seen, again in my opinion, as a weak link, to say the least. So where Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer just simply blinded again by what they would see as Mandelson's strange ability to connect with people and almost sort of hypnotic, a little bit Rasputin-like in many ways, perhaps. Were he blinded by that? If they were, again, to call it naive is an understatement. This is not leadership. This is not prudent leadership. This is worrying. It's worrying in of itself that the guy was appointed. Really worrying, but worrying also that Keir and or his advisor or advisors made this decision. If this is what's been going on behind the scenes. So let's go here, because I think it's important to listen to the aforementioned David Davis.
The right honourable gentleman is exactly right, and we will come to a number of circumstances where information was available which should have been acted upon and wasn't. And this was not as hard as some may try to portray. After all, the appointment did not come as a surprise. I mean, Lord Melton himself was clearly campaigning to become the ambassador after he failed to win the chancellorship of Oxford University.
I'm going to pause it there. After he failed to win the chancellorship for Oxford University, what is going on with these people? It is really like just a little club, isn't it? And they all sort of drift around in the background, like dry ice in the corridors, and they float along mysteriously with little conversations and winks and nods. It does make you wonder about the calibre of the people who are very often in the shadows, until recently in this case.
I suspect, I think somebody told me that he was actually campaigning whilst he was campaigning. So he was after two jobs, not one. So it was clear early that that he was going to attempt to do this, and there was widespread discussion at the time about his suitability for the role, and therefore there was plenty of time for a preliminary investigative or vetting process. There was and is vast amounts of data in the public domain.
Yep.
Most of what I'm going to speak of today is public domain material. I'll explain when it's not, but most of it is. And what would that vetting process be looking for? Traditionally, and I speak, and a number of us on these benches, and most benches I imagine, have been through these vetting processes ourselves. What would they look for? Traditionally, they'd review the history and personality of the candidate, assessing risks. Mm-hmm. The risk of the candidate being susceptible to undue influence. Or in the extreme example, blackmail. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese collect compromat all the time. Risks of the candidate abusing or misusing the role. Risks of the candidate doing something that would cause reputational damage. Or, and some on the Labour front bench may find this difficult, rather old-fashioned perhaps, risks the candidate is too morally flawed to be given a major role in any place.
You know, absolutely. Bang on the money. Morally flawed. It isn't old-fashioned, in my opinion. And if it is, it needs to be front and centre, because this is what we're missing, I think, with a lot of these people. They get carried away, they get into the echo chambers, they hide themselves in meetings and surround themselves with yes people very often, and they forget that they're there to serve. They forget sometimes who they are. Groupthink, you could argue, almost in the defence, but this is kind of indefensible. To lose track of your moral compass, to not be anchored to your values, which is a charge I've brought against Keir Starmer before, is tantamount to, it's almost treasonous in many ways, if you think about it, because without a moral core, without that moral compass, who the heck is leading in this country in some of those roles? It's actually appalling when you think about it. And you know, I come back to a phrase I've used before to borrow from the movie Gladiator. Commodus is not a moral man. And without morality, and most of us, I know there are differences, can agree on some of the core concepts of what is right and wrong. You know, protect the vulnerable and innocent like children. And if someone doesn't think that, then the vast majority of people would be appalled and disgusted, to say the least. So morals are less variable, in my opinion, for most people than, say, ethics, which can be connected to business and written for specific situations. So let's then go here. Leaked emails showed supportive messages Lord Mandelson sent to Epstein in 2008, following the convicted sex offender's guilty plea, declaring, "I think the world of you." Now, people have made quite a lot of that. They've sort of said, "Okay, my goodness, what on earth is Mandelson saying?" But what I would suggest is this: that is who he is. He is the manipulator. He is the Machiavellian type. And if your moral compass varies according to the body in the room, the biggest mass, so to speak, the sort of gravitational field in terms of power and influence, if it varies like that, and I believe Mandelson's does and has done for probably ever, then writing something like "I think the world of you" it's odd and distasteful to look at it through the lens of time. But don't think for a second that Mandelson does think that. I don't think he does. I don't think he cares. This is someone who probably doesn't do guilt very well, or remorse, and has an inflated sense of who he is. He probably doesn't experience fear in the same way as other people. He's there to manipulate, to schmooze, to find ways to drink in all the pleasures that money and power can bring you. That's what he's there for. So that's simply another example, a snapshot of the tendrils of this guy going ever outwards. And without those morals, in my opinion, without any sense of right and wrong or ethics, then that's nothing to him. He literally doesn't care. He probably wrote the same thing to, I don't know, some pious religious leader. That's the level of the Machiavellian, and I think that's being kind, type of individual that Mandelson is. And therefore, we come back to Keir and or his advisor or advisors. What were you thinking? You apparently, on the face of it, have gambled and thought, well, we know what this guy's like, but who cares? Because he can connect us to power and the levers of power. And that is not a choice that a decent and honourable leader would have, could have, should have made. This, in of itself, exposes a deep flaw in Keir Starmer's thinking.